What I'd like to do now is introduce our panelists. We'll start first here with John Allison. He has a PhD in metallurgical engineering and materials science from Carnegie Mellon University. He was a postdoctoral fellow at Braun Boveri Company in Baden, Switzerland. He's also had 27 years of experience at Ford Motor Company, and he currently serves as a professor of materials science and engineering at the University of Michigan. Our next panelist is Deborah Heyl Clegg, and she has her PhD in medicinal chemistry from the University of Michigan. She was a postdoctoral fellow at Warner Lambert Park Davis, formerly Pfizer, and is now a professor of chemistry at Eastern Michigan University. And all the way at the end, we have Diane Peters, and she has a PhD in mechanical engineering from the University of Michigan, and also a postdoctoral fellowship from the University of Michigan. She's a senior control systems engineer at LMS International for 2 years before becoming an assistant professor of mechanical engineering at Kettering University. And with that, why don't we start down here with John and just work our way down the aisle, if you could share.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Tershia. Well, welcome. I hope that I have some things that might be interesting. We'll find out more in the Q&A. So, Tershia gave me some ideas about things that I might talk about. So, first one was how I decided to make the transition from industry to academia. So that happened about 4 years ago for me, after a long, very wonderful career at Ford Motor Company. I'd had calls several times to go to academia in my career, and it was never the right time or the right thing. And in 2010, Michigan called and said, we really need to build my area, structural metals, and would you be interested? And so that was a good time for me in my career because, I could either spend the end stage of my career thinking about metals or cars. And I wanted to think more about metals. And there were some national initiatives that were coming along that I could be involved with much more aggressively at a place like Michigan than at Ford. And also a little bit, when you're in industry, you always have a boss. And I had some great bosses, and I had some okay bosses. In academia, you're your own boss. So I think of academics as entrepreneurs. All my fellow 22 some odd faculty members are all entrepreneurs that sort of are housed together, and we're all a bunch of anarchists as well. So it's an interesting environment. So some key differences between industry and academia. So in industry, I did a lot of I was at Ford. We were in a basic research lab, or a research lab, that had a good mix of basic and applied research. And so working on technology that got into real industry was parts or models that our colleagues were using was a great motivator. And I loved almost every day of it. Also, teams are a very big part of industry. So teaming was a thing that I took a lot of joy from at Ford. I led a number of good-sized teams, and that was great. Industry is a lot of meetings. You meet all the time. Academics hate meetings. It's a lot of hard work. There's a lot of rewards. I've worked hard all my career and done some good things I'm very proud of, but it was always a lot of hard work. Also, I noticed in industry, so I'm reflecting on certain things that then I find different in academia, primarily. Tended to be, within our work groups, very tight-knit, very location. We were all in the same location, and so that was another piece of it. Okay, transitioning to university. Last 4 years, I told you I work hard. I've never worked so hard in my life. So think about why you want to do that. If you want to go into academia, you really need to have a passion you want to go for if you want an academic career. Never worked so hard in my life. There's teaching, fundraising, teaching students, your own grad students, setting up a lab, etc. A big part of what I'm doing is starting centers at Michigan. Been successful at that. So that's another big part of it. When I go into the classroom, I never feel 100% ready. There's just not enough time in the day to feel 100% ready. I don't know what you guys feel, but that's the way I feel. So after 4 years of it, it's still a little disquieting to go into a classroom and not feel 100% ready. But the industry background that I have is great. It's a great motivator for the coursework, the lectures, and the material. It's also a great motivator for the research, and it provides a lot of credibility when I'm talking about something that I really have used in industry. I love teaching seniors because I know the course I'm teaching right now, they will all use this in some way or shape or form, and so I can motivate them. Let's see. I'm my own boss, so I work whenever, wherever I want. It's a lot more, my wife tells me, well, so I took an early retirement from Ford. So she tells me I flunked retirement. But, you know, we have a cottage that we visit every summer up in Leelanau, and so this summer we're up there, and I was working on a paper and a coursework and stuff like that. So you work wherever you want. I work at home, I work in my pajamas, whatever. I didn't do that so much at Ford. Teamwork. The biggest surprise and really disappointment for me has been that in academia, we seem to have bred the teamwork gene out of faculty. I didn't occur to me. That's the biggest surprise. And now I'm talking to many people. That's just kind of the way academics think. We're much more individual or two-body or three-body things, not large teams. So that's something I'm still working out. Let's see. So then the other thing Tershia just gave me said, in terms of how would you find a job in academia, networking. So I've always been a big proponent of professional societies, the president of my society, et cetera. So networking. That's the biggest thing, is keep that going. If you're in a large company, it's not so bad. If you're in a small company, it may be more difficult, but keep up with the networking anyway. So there you go.
Okay, well, my experience was a little different from John's because I sort of had a very strong inclination that I was going to be in academia from the very beginning. I always really enjoyed teaching. I didn't really do much, I wasn't really a teaching assistant in graduate school, but I did do a lot of tutoring, and I always found that I really loved just interacting with the students one-on-one. But when it came time to graduate, I was really looking around for jobs. I couldn't really find a faculty position that you could get without postdoctoral experience. You really need to have that extra, running a lab and extra research project experience on your own. So I started looking around, and I actually, it was through networking that my PhD advisor knew somebody at what was then Warner Lambert Park Davis, eventually became Pfizer. I think U of M has that building now and Pfizer's gone. But that's where I worked. He had a friend who was looking for a postdoctoral fellow in his lab at Pfizer. So I thought, well, it's not really, industry isn't really where I think I want to be, but, let's give it a shot. Maybe I'm going to find that I really like it. There's a lot more money in industry. I'm thinking before I give up the big bucks, before I really decide, I want to be a faculty member, let's do this postdoc in industry. So I was there for about a year. It wasn't that I didn't enjoy it. I mean, I did. But it wasn't a fit for me. Like John was saying, there are a lot of meetings. I felt like I spent so much of my time in meetings talking about what we were doing that it was hard to get things done. And that just wasn't for me. It was also much more regimented than I wanted for my career. It was, you're there 8 to 5, or there was some flexibility within that, but not as much as there is in academics. And while I was there, I was teaching on the side at EMU. I took a lecturing job, an adjunct lecturer, and taught a course. So that was a very crazy busy year for me because I was preparing a course for the first time. First time ever through a course teaching, believe me, is not a walk in the park. Putting all those lectures together, and that was, of course, in the days before PowerPoint and all that. But yeah, it was all my notes, and having together, you find that when you have to teach something, you have to really understand it well, because you never know what kind of questions you're going to get, and you have to really be able to explain it well. So I was doing that in the evenings. So it was, crazy working all day long. I'd come home, I'd go teach my class, which was a couple days a week, 2 or 3 days a week. In the evenings, it was a 5:30 class. And then I'd go home and I'd crazily, prepare my lectures for the next night, or grade or tests or write tests or whatever. But that was a great experience. That year gave me really an opportunity to see both sides of, what's teaching like, what's a faculty position going to be like, what's an industry position going to be like. And I decided that I really enjoyed the teaching for a lot of the same reasons that John mentioned. The flexibility, the fact that I could set my own hours within reason. I mean, obviously, you can't come marching in at noon every day, but I have a lot of contributions to my schedule. What hours of the day do I like to teach? For example, I taught this morning, and I'm teaching later, but this is kind of a break in the middle today. So you can kind of set your own hours, so to speak. You can do a lot of your work at home. So I do a lot of my test writing, a lot of my grading, that kind of stuff at home. The downside of that is that your job never ends. There's very little definition between my home life and my work life. It's everything just sort of flows into just life, I was standing in line at Disney World over the summer answering emails from students. My kids were, "Mom, get off your phone," So I always, the email and the students having questions about things, that doesn't really stop. So even when you're home, there are people who will say, "Oh, I don't answer my email after 5 o'clock." I find it hard to do that. So that the job doesn't really ever end. But then, the flip side of that is it's nice to have the flexibility that I don't need to be at work at 8 o'clock in the morning every day. Another thing that's different between the two is in industry, you do have a boss, but you also have usually funding. So the money's there to do whatever project you're going to work on. You don't need to worry about bringing in the funding. If you're going to, it's nice to be able to say, "Oh, I'm going to do this, pursue this project. I'm going to train students, and I'm going to work in the lab. I'm going to do this project. This is what I want to work on. I'm my own boss. No one else is telling me what I have to do." But you have to get money for it. You have to get funding. And so that part is sort of the downside. It's really hard to get funding for your research in faculty positions. So I would say some of the pluses and minuses, but I think it's time to.
Okay. Well, my background is yet a little bit different from those two, so you get 3 very different perspectives. When I graduated with my undergraduate degree, I had no interest in academia. I didn't really know what it was. I didn't know what kind of jobs those were, and I went into industry. Excuse me. And I worked in industry for 13 years doing machine design. And that was before I even thought of getting a PhD. I did get a master's along the way, because after a few years in industry, I realized that contrary to what I had thought when I was 22, I did not know everything yet. And a master's will qualify you to teach at a community college. And a friend of mine and former colleague had been teaching as an adjunct at a community college, and he had a personal emergency, and 2 days before class was going to start, he could not teach it. So he called me up and he said, "Diane, they're looking for somebody. You're qualified. Would you like to do it?" And I said, "What the heck? I'll give it a try. If I don't like it, I'll do it for 1 term and then no hard feelings." Well, much to my surprise, I found that I really liked teaching. And so for a number of years, I was teaching as an adjunct at night at this community college, and I was working during the day. And as I did this, things were progressing in my career. I had the advantage that I was able to teach students what I was actually doing for a living. I was teaching courses in using CAD software that I used to design machinery in the day. At night, I taught students to do that exact same thing. Well, I came to a point in my career where I was saying, what next? I had gone as far as I could technically at the small company I worked for. And I had to decide, did I want to stay there doing the same thing over and over for the rest of my career? No, boring. Did I want to go into management, possibly get an MBA, become a manager? Not for me. Important role, but not remotely what I wanted to do. And when I really thought about what were the things I liked about my night job and my day job, I came to the conclusion that I wanted to be a professor of engineering. Well, if you're going to do that at someplace other than a community college, unless you've got some really unusual circumstances, you need a PhD. So at the age of 35, I quit my job, moved to another state, and started on a PhD program at the University of Michigan. I got my PhD, and then I was looking for academic jobs, but for personal reasons, I had some constraints on where in the country I was willing to go. And that's something some of you may find if you have spouses and you want them to have a job near you, or if you have elderly parents who you want to be close to. So I hung around University of Michigan doing a postdoc for a year, and then my postdoc funding ended, and I had to do something, so I worked in industry for another 2 years at a different kind of industry job. Instead of doing machine design, I was doing controls engineering. And I did that for about 2 years. There were a lot of good things about that job. One of them was that I was able to have some flexibility in my schedule. When the company wants you to be on a Skype call with India at 5 a.m., they are going to have a little bit of give in terms of can you do that at home or the office, and what other hours do you have to work. And it was a great experience, but it, again, wasn't what I wanted long term. When I thought sincerely, do I still want to look for the academic job, because the industry job does have very good money attached to it, there were certain things I still wanted that I was not getting out of that job. I wanted more autonomy. I did have some. When you have an industry position with a PhD, you have more autonomy than you do as a lower level position where you go with just a bachelor's degree. But I wanted that teaching, I wanted that contact with students, I wanted to have certain impacts that I could not do where I was. So I kept looking for just the right faculty job. And one thing you'll find if you're moving between industry and academia is that there are some universities that highly value industry experience, and there are some that quite frankly don't see the point. So part of your finding the right fit involves, do they value you, who you are and what you bring? And one of the things that got me my interview at Kettering University, where I am now, is the industry experience. Because Kettering is one of those universities that highly values that. It used to be GMI, General Motors Institute, you might have heard of it. All of our students do co-ops. We have a little bit of an unusual kind of setup. But because all of our students do co-ops, they have industry experience as they're going through school. Most of the mechanical engineering department, most of my colleagues have industry experience. So I fit in very well there, and for me, that is just the perfect fit. So that's one of the things that's really valuable, and just a few more things, and then I think we're going to be opening it for questions, but the two worlds are not totally separate. If you're in academia, you will probably be getting some of your funding from industry as well as some from government sources like NSF, and being able to talk that language and know those problems is useful. And academic experience is not useless in industry, because in industry you may find yourself teaching training courses. If, for example, LMS has software, if I had wanted to, I could have asked to be assigned to a job where I would be training people. And the mentoring that you do of students in academia is useful in industry, because you will have junior colleagues who you want to mentor, and if you go into management, part of a good manager's job is mentoring. So they are not totally separate worlds, and you can move back and forth between them, although, of course, it isn't always easy.
So now we'd like to open it up for questions. Who would like to get us started as you think about some of the concerns that may have been brought up from some of these comments?
So from what she said, either of you have been in industry for some long time and then moved to academia, or the other way around. So is there a way to start both at the same time?
Well, a couple of us did adjuncting as we worked. I worked during the day and adjuncted at the community college during the evening, and I believe you said you did as well?
Right, and that gives you, if you think you might eventually want a full-time faculty position, having that experience doing both is actually really valuable. I think that's how I got the position at EMU when the tenure track position came open. I had already taught for them in the evenings. They had my course evaluations and they had feedback, and so they knew kind of, I guess, what they were getting a little bit.
Have any of your colleagues ever worked in summers in industry?
I think so, yeah. A few of them have gone back and to there's one guy I know who came from industry also, who goes back to his company sometimes in the summer when he's not teaching and does a little bit of research there.
Yeah, along the same lines, so I was an adjunct here at Michigan for better part of 20 years of my 27 at Ford. So I had a relationship with the department, not teaching. I didn't have time for that, and I realized that after I started teaching, but more as a research advisor. So, yeah.
Additional questions? We'll start here and then we'll come to you.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about moving to industry or academy, and one of my criterion have been that how much impact I have in faculty position or industry. So that's, by impact is a general word. So, but I wanted to ask you, especially John, that has been in industry for 27 years. What have you done that you have been proud of in this 27 years or 20 years that I have did this, and how about that 4 years? In terms of the impact that you have.
Well, certainly at Ford, we had substantial impact, not only on our products, but one of the things that we were part of and one of the things that actually made me interested in moving here, we founded a new discipline in the field of materials. It's called Integrated Computational Materials Engineering. So I don't know, if you're not materials people, you probably haven't heard of the Materials Genome Initiative, but it was a presidential initiative that started in 2011. And it sort of stemmed from, in no small part, some work we did at Ford. So there's no question that you can have impact there, but you can also have enormous impact at place, in an academic environment. So we're doing many of the same things here in the centers that we're working on that will continue that impact. But you also, one of the things that attracted me was so with this new discipline, there's a need for a culture change in our field. And it was a way to really start that cultural change with the students, both undergrad and grad students. So I think both places you can have an impact if it's a matter of managing that.
I'll add to that. When in those 13 years that I worked in industry, one of the companies I worked for almost went under. When the economy had a downturn in 2001, the company I worked for, which was already small, had to cut half the company. They had to cut the engineering department, and we went from 6 mechanical engineers to 1. I was the sole survivor. Now, you may not have ever seen the products because they were used for the printing industry and not the sort of thing that you see in your homes, but there were 50 people who would have lost their job if I had screwed up mine because I was designing the machines, other than the electrical part. We had 1 electrical engineer. So if you look at impact, the company would have gone under if I had screwed up. Those jobs, yeah, the CEO and all those people had an impact, but that was me. And also when you think about the machines you're designing, if you go into the field and look at them, safety is key. If I had screwed up my job, people could have gotten hurt or died. If I did my job right, then they had good products that came out well, their jobs were easier. So it really does have a lot of impact, and sometimes you don't see it. And if you don't think your job has impact, start thinking about what happens if I screw it up. Start thinking about what happens if I just phone it in. And we never gave up at that company, and it's doing much better now. It was on solid ground when I left to go back to school. I have a couple of patents, partly because of that work. There are some machines that actually got featured in a couple of magazines that I could have signed. So it does have an impact. And then in academia, you have, of course, the impact on the students, and the impact of your research is up to you.
I have a couple of questions. My first question is more for John. Could you talk maybe a little bit about your experience as a postdoc in Switzerland, and how easy or hard was it for you to come back and transition back here in the US? And my second question is, do you mostly see people transitioning from industry to academia? Do you have, I know I'm not sure if anyone of you have done that, but do you have any comments or thoughts about maybe transitioning the other way around? And is that something that even happens? Or once you come in academia, you kind of stay?
No, that's not the case.
Well, so specifically about the postdoc abroad, that I highly recommend you all consider that. It was a wonderful broadening experience for my wife and I. It was not hard to come back because in Switzerland you get a 1-year visa and then you have to go back. So 6 months in, I'm writing letters for job applications, and had a very intense several-week trip back to the U.S. to find that perfect job. And I found the one in Ford.
That experience really helped you, like doing a postdoc in a different country?
Oh yes. I found it. I grew up in a little town in Missouri and went to school in Colorado, and moved around in the U.S. But that international experience was fabulous. Yeah.
Did you find that it helped you open up doors to other opportunities too, with that being on your CV, or were there other
I'm not sure.
benefits?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. Probably. Yeah, just a different perspective. It gave me a little bit more of I was in the Air Force before I went to grad school, so I already had a little bit of an industrial focus and bias, but that added a little bit more credibility to that. In terms of going from academia to industry, probably is a little less common, but I don't see necessarily barriers unless there are things that you have to unlearn when you go to industry.
I've known a number of people who have done that. I'm involved in a number of professional societies that have people from a variety of backgrounds. And a couple of the people I can think of who have done that, in some cases it was because of a move and a spouse had a great job opportunity and there were no universities. In some cases it was money. In some cases they decided they simply wanted a change. But the thing that they all had in common was they already had some connections with industry. Their research had not been exclusively NSF-funded theoretical work. They had had funding from industry. They had had practical research projects. They had maintained those contacts. So if that's something you think you might want, then you want to make sure that you stay involved in those professional societies that have both industry people and academics in them, and you want to make sure that you have something that you can point to. And anytime you're making a transition, you want to sit down and reflect and ask yourself, why am I doing this? What are the things I'm looking for? Because people don't want to hear, I'm running from this. They want to hear, I'm running to you because of what you have to offer. And then you want to figure out which of your skills are transferable, and there will be a lot of them. But you have to look through and see that yourself so that you can sell that to them.
Deborah, did you want to add?
No, I don't really have a lot of experience with people moving the other direction, so.
I know we had a question right here, and then we'll continue.
Actually, I have a couple of questions. They pertain to, usually the main theme or the most postdocs usually will go through their graduate education, then they will go through postdoc. The majority of their work is basically research, and then when they go to apply for faculty positions, they will get turned down just because of the fact that they lack, say, didactic teaching experience or so. So my first question would be: is teaching experience crucially required for faculty appointments? And if so, if you have, or if the applicant has international teaching experience, say over in the Middle East, is that transferable, or can that be related to the faculty application in the USA? Are there schools in the USA that will value that or will appreciate that, or eventually, will the applicant have to go through, say, volunteer appointments or so to basically acquire more experience so he will be competitive enough for these applications?
Well, I can speak to that, I think, because I've actually chaired several search committees for faculty positions at Eastern, and I think that it is somewhat dependent on the type of university that you're applying to. So at EMU, we're very teaching focused. We're not a Research One university, so we want people who want to teach. we don't necessarily want people who are going to win the Nobel Prize with their research. You know, you have to be invested in the students. You have to have a project that is going to be something you can involve students in. Because a lot of our research is done by the students, so we're mentoring them and training them how to do it. So for us, the teaching experience is pretty much essential, and if somebody really wants to teach at a university like that, or like a small liberal arts college, I would say that it would be really important to show that you have sought out opportunities to teach, maybe not even an entire course, but pieces of a course here or there. That you've maybe stepped in for your advisor and taught part of their course for them during a semester. For a research university like a U of M kind of place, I'm not sure that is as imperative. I think they're looking more for your research. You know, can you develop a really novel research program and get funding? I think that the emphasis is a little bit different. And I'm not sure. No, yeah, feel free to.
Yeah, no, so I've been on several search committees and been involved in a number of faculty decisions on hires, and it always comes up. It's teaching is important, part of what we do, even if a big part of our focus is on research and research funding. But teaching is also anything that you can demonstrate on the teaching side as a commitment to that and as experience in that. Is important.
I'm serving on a search committee right now, and I would echo that teaching experience is important. Now, if it's in a slightly non-traditional place, then that's something that you would want to think, how do I sell this as it's not a bug, it's a feature? You could sell it as, say, I am experienced with a diverse range of students because I've taught internationally and I've mentored students in this country. So what you want to do is you want to think about what is it about what you've done that really serves their needs. And if I'm looking at some of these applications and somebody says, I've taught in another country, obviously we would want to know, can they teach in this country? Are they familiar with our culture? How are their communication skills in English? But the fact that you've taught in another country shows that you do have teaching experience, and it shows that you do have experience with students from other cultures. So that would be something that we definitely would not rule you out. We would want to look and see some of these other things, as I said, the communications, but having some ability to say, hey, I can teach and I know it, as opposed to I've never done it, but I think it sounds like fun, is crucial.
So I have one last question to ask, and simply put, can faculty members survive without funding? Say positions that is 70-30, 10 or 70-20, 10, 60-30, 10. Like, is there a position that will basically involve teaching, and research will be more like you will get a small but fixed budget that you can do like a small but a productive research that can surmount in publications, maybe not at a fast pace, but you know, a small but a fixed budget that you don't really have to worry about bringing in money from the outside, and the survival of the applicant depends primarily on his or her performance as a teacher and as an administrative official in this school. Is there positions like there?
Maybe like the small liberal arts colleges, I would say they probably still want you to do research, but the funding isn't as big of a deal. At Eastern, you can get tenure without bringing in a big grant, but they're very happy if you bring in a big grant. They very much encourage you to apply for external funding, but there are little pots of money that you can get from the provost, from the dean, that will sort of keep you running as long as it's not a real expensive research program. So, you know, I had some bigger grants earlier in my career, and lately I've been focusing on other things and haven't brought in a whole lot of external money, but I've been able to keep my operation running with these little tiny internal pots of money. So I think it's feasible, but the culture's, I don't know, it's changing. Everything's becoming much more research oriented, even at the teaching schools.
Well, what you're saying about having a small piece of money, the question is, where does it come from? Money has to come from somewhere. Nobody has a magic pot of money to hand out. As a newer faculty member at Kettering, I have a startup package. I have a limit on how much money I can spend for things. It isn't infinite. It's a certain amount of money up to X amount. and it has to be spent within 3 years, and after that, I've got to get money. Now, if you have a great idea and nobody is willing to fund it, there are some small internal grants you can get, but the expectation is if you're going to do things that cost money, you got to find it somewhere. Now, if you've got research that you can do just on the whiteboard and publish some wonderful piece of theoretical work that requires nothing more than the computing resources your university already has, there are schools that'll look very favorably on that, but you have to check on the culture of the school.
Did you feel at some point disappointed in academia? Maybe students are lazy, the most boring proposal got accepted. Did you feel something like that? And if you did, how did you resolve your doubts?
You know, the disappointments I've had in academia have not been worse and have probably been less than the ones I had in industry. No job is perfect. Every job has some downsides, and any group of people you have to deal with anywhere. There will be wonderful people, there will be people who are okay, but you maybe don't see eye to eye with, and there are people that you will just be frustrated out of your mind with. It doesn't matter where you are, you run into that.
Dealing with rejection and proposal rejection is a new found skill you have to develop.
Yeah.
I've been very fortunate that way, but when you get a proposal back and it's just, you got these terrible evaluations, you say, wait a minute, did they just read this?
Yeah.
So,
I believe there's a-
never with students. That's certainly, you know, the first time I taught this one course and thought I was going to have to flunk a student, I was really happy when that person withdrew from the class because I didn't want to flunk him.
That's not a fun experience.
That's not a
but-
fun one.
I was wondering, in industry, were you ever given flexibility to pursue some of the projects that you were interested in? Or did you kind of have to fit in with what your boss was?
To an extent. I worked for small companies, and we had projects that were done because customers wanted certain things, but we also had occasionally the opportunity to do some new development. It was always constrained. If you had a really good idea for something that the company could make money on, you could try to sell it to somebody, but the problem was freeing up the time to do it. Now, if you wanted to go home and spend your weekend doing something and bring it back and the company would patent it and give you $1 and a pat on the back, go for it. And that depends very much on the job. I'm sure there are some jobs where people have a lot more of that. Perhaps you did it, Ford?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so I was in a corporate research lab, and there, we set largely our own research agendas. You know, it went through many changes over the years. First, it was defined path of relevance, and then it was very much directed at some sort of a product. But, you know, you obviously had to convince not only your management that this was a good idea, but also within the company, the people that might be providing part of the funding for it. But that was, it was always pretty self-directed in my case. So, and as we worked on many, many more applied things, it's possible in a culture like that to keep a research or a basic science part of it going. But it's much more difficult in a small company.
Yes.
All three of you have postdocs. Did you find that that was a crucial step in being able to pursue the careers you wanted in academia and industry, or difference across the disciplines?
In my case, I would say not really. My postdoc was valuable in a certain sense because it did give me more experience, the opportunity to write some more papers, but the main thing it did was buy time. I had to have an income, and that was a way of getting it. I think that it sounds from what they're saying like their postdocs may have been more crucial, so maybe they'll weigh in with that.
Yeah, I think it's hard to find a faculty position without postdoctoral experience. Occasionally you might be really lucky and step into something where you're a perfect fit for what they're looking for, but usually they want to see that experience. And I found that just having the differing experience and working in a slightly different research area and having to approach problems from a different perspective with a different mentor who had different ways of looking at things was really valuable for me. It helped me to become more of an independent thinker and to be able to set up my own lab and decide what I wanted to do, which I really felt like as a student coming out first thing, like, oh, I'm not so sure. But after that year of postdocing, I felt a lot more confident in my ability to sort of have my own proposal and run my own lab.
I think for me, I knew when I completed my PhD that I wanted to go either to industry or national lab. So the postdoc wasn't essential for that. It was just it was essential from the point of view of broadening my horizons and learning different ways of doing things that I might not have had. So it's made me who I am today. So if that's essential, then it's essential. But it wasn't a critical path to what I ended up early on. I think if you want an academic career, it is very, very important to have that transition.
Yeah, there's two hands, one, two.
So one of the biggest hurdles I've heard of going from industry to academia is that you don't publish in industry the way you do in academia. So how did you prove to these universities that you could get published and that you could get the funding required for your position?
Well, at Ford, we were free to publish, and it went through many cycles. It wasn't necessarily encouraged, but it was not discouraged. And so I just did it because I thought it was important to do more from an intellectual point of view and from being part of the network, being part of the club. So I just made sure I was always publishing some aspect of what I was doing. Some places that's more difficult, and it's still important to figure out that piece of it. But yeah.
I wasn't able to publish things from my industry jobs, but what I did do was I had a few side projects that I was publishing on. For example, I was partnering with someone here at U of M and CRLT to do some work on engineering education research. And the advantage of that was that it was far enough removed from my day job that there was no question of, you have to get this approved through us, it's intellectual property, we have to make sure nothing's sneaking out. I also had a couple of projects that I was working on with a friend of mine who was in academia. She was a visiting professor elsewhere. We had been postdocs together, and we had some work that we had done basically at her kitchen table while she was on maternity leave that we were working up into a paper. So I think that doing that independently was important, and while I wasn't able to get a lot of papers, the fact that I was doing it on my own with no encouragement from my job was something that I could sell to the university as, hey, the fact that I've been doing it at all shows that I can and that I'm committed to it.
I was actually going to ask exactly the same thing, but I can kind of modify it to the idea that since you guys have helped look for faculty in a similar situation to that, have you looked at people from industry and noticed that they have not been publishing necessarily, and how have you evaluated that fact?
We have a faculty member at Eastern who came after about 10 or 15 years in the polymer industry, and I think, we just, when we were looking at his application, again, he sold, a lot of it is selling yourself, he had also been doing adjunct positions and teaching in community colleges, but he had some patents that he was on. I think he did have a publication or two. It wasn't as extensive as you would have if you had been in a postdoc, but we sort of said, okay, that's all right, he's not able to publish what he's doing, he's sort of proving himself in other ways. So I think you do, if the person seems like they're a really good fit for your program and they come in for an interview and they nail it and they give a good seminar and you're willing to look past that aspect of it.
I would agree with that. When we evaluate applicants for a position, we go through and we look at a number of different categories. And if somebody is strong in all but one, we might still bring them in if they seem to really fit a need. And then, of course, once they get in there, it's their job to sell us on the fact that they can do that additional piece, that they just haven't had that opportunity.
So it's certainly an open, it's not a hard requirement.
If you haven't published since your PhD and you've been working in industry and you have everything else, we'll at least consider you. It depends in part on how well you fit into the particular area that we're looking for. It depends in part on who else is in the applicant pool. If there's somebody who's absolutely perfect who nails everything, you're going to have a harder time. But normally, nobody has everything we're looking for.
Depends on the position and the university and the department.
It's very subjective.
It's very
Yeah.
subjective.
We have time for one more question in the back.
I had a question about when you have people coming in that have spent a significant amount of time in industry and now they're going into academia, do they start at the beginning of the tenure track process, or how does that work?
It depends. I have 13 years before my PhD, 2 years after, and I started as an assistant professor. It sounds like that's not the case for you.
No, I came as a full professor without tenure. At Michigan, even with 27 years, I had to
Yeah.
prove myself. They said it was by teaching, but it was really making sure I could raise money.
It depends.
Yeah, you'll never come in and tenured. I mean, even if you come in as an associate or a full professor, you still have to prove yourself to earn the tenure. But mostly we've had people start in as assistant professors, but with a shorter track, if they wanted it, a shorter track to tenure.
Yeah, so I had a 3-year track instead of 6. Yeah, well, I had to apply for early tenure.
So we are going to wrap up the session now. I just wanted to pause just to see if the panelists had any other final thoughts as we are closing out.
No decision is ever irrevocable. It's always possible to either change the job, to change the university, or to change between them. It may be hard, but you're not totally ruling out any option at this point.
That's
Well
true.
said.
I would echo that and say that it's just really a matter of finding a place that fits you. You know, what your goals are, how you see you spending your hours every day, and which environment is a better fit for what you want to do.
Yep. Find your passion and follow it.
Let's thank our panelists.